In 1994, a 5-year-old boy named Lucas walked into the Monroe YMCA locker room and never walked back out. No struggle, no screams, just a locker key left on a wooden bench and a red lanyard swaying from a hook. The cameras were down that week. The pool staff didn't notice he was missing until it was already too late. The case went cold by fall. But 30 years later, when we drained the pool for good, we found what no one had dared to imagine. And what we saw beneath that hatch was never supposed to be uncovered. Before we start, hit subscribe to help uncover stories they tried to bury and make sure no name stays forgotten. My name is Ella Moreno. I've lived in Monroe most of my life. I'm 47 now. Grew up 2 blocks from the old YMCA, went to school over on Crescent Street, joined the department when I was 25. Back then, the town was quieter, the kind of place where parents let their kids ride bikes to the corner store, where summer meant popsicles, lawn chairs, and chlorine. That building on Sycamore Avenue, Monroe, YMCA, it was a fixture. Everyone had a memory tied to it. Swim classes, holiday bake sales, family movie nights in the rec room. It was just part of the rhythm of being from here. When I first started as a rookie, the Danner case was one of those unsolveds that sat in a dusty cabinet, filed under cold and forgotten. Lucas Danner, 5 years old, vanished from the boys' locker room on Labor Day weekend 1994. There were theories. Maybe he wandered off. Maybe he slipped out through the back exit. But there were no witnesses, no footage, just that red lanyard and an empty locker. Over time, people stopped talking about it. A few staff left. The building stayed open for a while, but the pool closed permanently around 2005. Mold, they said. Some kind of ventilation issue. It stayed locked up for years after that, just collecting dust and rumors. This past July, the city finally approved renovations. The plan was to drain the pool, tear up the foundation, and convert the building into a youth learning center. I didn't think much of it. That morning, I was halfway through my coffee when I got a call from dispatch. A crew member had found something under the pool floor. Not a body, just something that didn't belong. I headed over around 7:40 a.m. The sun was already baking the concrete outside, and the smell inside was thick with mildew and heat. The pool was half-drained water, murky and green with time. Miguel, one of the site workers, pointed to a seam running along the deep end. A faint line in the concrete, maybe 6 feet wide. It wasn't a crack. It was a panel bolted in, welded along the edges. Not original construction. We brought in a city inspector. He looked it over and frowned. No records of it, no utility access below. The panel wasn't even listed on the original 1973 blueprint. By noon, we had approval to cut the bolts. I was standing at the edge when they pried it open. There was a groan of rust, then a rush of air, thick, stale, and metallic. Beneath us, a ladder descended into darkness. The inspector turned to me and said, "You might want to call your department." I went down first, 10 feet of steel ladder walls narrowing as I went. My flashlight caught the edge of painted cinder block pink, but faded and peeling. A mattress lay flat on the floor. No frame, just a sheet stained yellow with age. Plastic dinosaurs were scattered nearby. A Viewmaster. A small towel with the YMCA logo sun-faded but still visible. And on the far wall, in black marker, a child's handwriting, "Lucas was here." We hadn't even processed what we were standing in before someone above shouted again. They'd opened locker number 13. It had been sealed off since 92, rusted shut. Inside was a manila envelope, yellowed, unmarked, except for one line in red ink, "Mr. Private, do not destroy." We didn't open it until later that night. But as I climbed back up that ladder, I felt something shift, not just in the case, but in the town itself. 30 years we called this place safe. 30 years we let the water cover what was underneath. And now the drain was open. and something was rising. The panel beneath the YMCA pool had only been open a matter of hours when the call came down for us to seal the area and hold it until the FBI could get someone on site. I stayed behind while the others left for the evening, just me, the noise of the dehumidifiers, and a rusted ladder that disappeared into a dark, stale room beneath 12 feet of concrete. I don't know what I expected when I climbed down again. The air was still thick, almost metallic, like breathing through coins. The mattress was right where we'd left it, flat on the cinder block floor. No bed frame, no sheets, except the one that had turned yellow with time. The toys hadn't been touched either. Plastic dinosaurs, a doll missing an eye, and a Viewmaster with one cracked lens. The writing on the wall was faint, but it was there. Lucas was here. I took another look around the perimeter, this time slower. Someone had tried to make it look lived in. The baseboards were lined with mildew, and the walls had been painted pink at some point, but it had all peeled to a sickly gray. I saw a shelf with stacked VHS tapes, dozens of them neatly labeled with dates and numbers. We boxed them and sent them to the evidence room at the station. The one I kept was dated September 2nd, 1994. L. Danner Room Day 1. I had it transferred to digital before anyone touched it. We played it on an old converter screen in the forensics lab. The footage opened on a small room, same layout, same pink walls, the same mattress. The camera was fixed mounted to a tripod in the corner, time code stamped across the top 7:02 p.m. A child sat cross-legged on the mattress, small, sandy hair, bowl cut, red swim trunks, a faded blue towel with the YMCA logo draped over his shoulders. He didn't look scared yet, just confused. Then a man's voice off camera. "Calm, steady. Say your name for the tape, buddy." The boy hesitated. "Lucas. Full name. Lucas Danner." "Good boy." That voice didn't belong to anyone we'd identified yet. But it wasn't panicked. It wasn't angry. It was soft. Soft enough to pass for kind. Lucas glanced toward the edge of the room. "When can I go back to my mom?" The voice replied. "Soon. We're just going to play a few games first." Then it cut to static. That was the end of the tape. I didn't say anything right away. Just sat there in the darkened lab watching the blue light from the screen fade out like the last word in a sentence nobody finished. That was the moment I stopped thinking we'd found an old hiding spot. This was a holding place, a documented environment. There wasn't just a boy down there. There was a system. That night I met with Detective Ron Haskins. He's been with Monroe PD longer than anyone, including me. Cold case was his domain. When I showed him the footage, he didn't say anything for a long time. Then he got up and walked out of the room. 15 minutes later, he came back with a stack of files. 3 old cases, all Monroe, all YMCA, all between 1989 and 1994. All boys. 1 ruled accidental drowning, 1 a presumed runaway, 1 found in a utility closet with no clear cause of death. Locker keys were listed in the reports 11, 12, and 14. Lucas was 14. I asked if we had records for 13. Haskins said it was sealed off in 92. Plumbing repairs, they claimed. We got the warrant the next morning. When we cut the chain on locker 13, the hinges groaned from rust. Inside wasn't much. Just a sealed manila envelope yellowed from age. On the front, 1 line in red marker, Mr. Private. Do not destroy. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of notebook paper typed. A table of names. N. Ramos. D. Puit. J. Linwood. L. Danner. 2 blank rows beneath. Locker numbers, birth years, grade levels. The last column said, cleared. All but Lucas's were checked off. There was no hesitation after that. We pulled staffing records from the 1994 YMCA personnel directory. One name stood out: Marcus Rio, Assistant Director of Youth Programs, resigned in '95. No forwarding address. but the notes from HR said he'd requested after-hours access to the pool, had keys to the sub-basement. When we ran the name through old utilities accounts, we found a match in Racine, Wisconsin, still active under a different address, still paying cash, still off the radar. When local agents showed up at his door, he ran, made it 4 blocks before collapsing behind a fence. When they cuffed him, he said one sentence under his breath: "I never hurt them. I just cleaned up." We brought him back to Monroe the next day, interrogated him for hours. He didn't deny knowing Lucas, didn't deny building the room. "It wasn't my idea," he said. "I did what I was told." I asked him who gave the orders. He looked at me for a long time and then said something that didn't sit right. "You already met him. You just don't know it yet." We went back through old photos, holiday staff parties, community events. One image stood out. 1992 Christmas gathering, YMCA board. In the back row, Marcus Rio, arms crossed, awkward smile. Standing beside him, one hand on his shoulder, Charles Danner, board president, clean cut, pressed polo, and Lucas's uncle. That changed everything. We searched for Dana Danner, Lucas's mother. She was living in a retirement community just outside Bloomington. When we showed her the towel and the swim trunks, she broke down. "Chuck used to pick him up sometimes," she whispered. "He'd offer to take him to practice when I had work. Said it was no trouble." I looked at Haskins. He had access. He had authority. He had the boys' trust. Later that night, one of our techs finished restoring another tape, day 23. The footage opened on Lucas sitting on the mattress. He looked tired, smaller, his favorite stuffed bear beside him. Off camera, a voice said, "You promised. Good boys keep promises." Lucas whispered, "I don't want to do this." Then another voice entered, deeper, colder. I said, "Get ready." A man stepped into frame, just his torso, polo shirt, slacks, a YMCA name tag, Chuck. Lucas screamed. The screen went dark. That was the first time we saw him. The man behind the room. And Lucas. He looked straight into the camera before it cut. Not just scared aware, like he'd realized no one was coming, like he knew it was being recorded. We pulled every photo, every file, every background check on Charles Danner. No record, no accusations. A clean man on paper. But his name showed up again and again listed as a witness in past YMCA incidents. Present when Derek Voss disappeared in '85, signed off on locker renovations in '92, issued Lucas's locker key in '94, and now he was gone. We had footage. We had witness statements. We had a room beneath our feet that never should have existed. But the man at the center of it all had vanished before we even named him publicly, and that was the moment it hit me this wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning. Because Lucas wasn't the first. And if we didn't move fast, he wouldn't be the last. When we released the name Charles Danner to the Bureau, I knew it wouldn't sit quietly. Not in a town like Monroe. He wasn't a stranger. He was a board president, a business owner, a fixture in half the church newsletters we pulled from the archives. His photo was still hanging in the YMCA's front lobby when the place shut down. We had the tapes. We had eyewitness confirmation. And yet the reaction from the community wasn't outrage, it was hesitation. Neighbors called the department not with tips, but with uncertainty. "Are you sure it's him? Chuck was always good with kids. He volunteered for everything." Even after the warrant went out and the media picked up the name, the tone didn't shift. If anything, people grew quieter, like they were waiting for it to be walked back, waiting for someone to say it had all been a mistake. When I interviewed Dana again, Lucas's mother, she told me something that stuck. That back in '94, after Lucas disappeared, Chuck showed up at her house with food and flowers, sat beside her on the porch, said he couldn't sleep knowing his nephew was out there, promised to help fund the search, and he did. Wrote a check to the task force, made sure it got press coverage. even organized a candlelight vigil in the church courtyard. She never questioned it. No one did. And now, when she thinks back on it, she said the thing that bothers her most isn't what he did. It's how convincing he was. I thanked him, she said. I hugged him for caring. The silence around that man, it wasn't accidental. It was cultivated. The first pushback didn't come from the public. It came from inside the department. One of our senior investigators, who'd been on the force since the 80s, came into my office with a file in his hand and said, "You sure you want to keep pressing this? That family's got roots here." I told him it wasn't about roots. It was about a 5-year-old who never came home. He left the file on my desk and didn't come back the next day. Then the city council issued a statement calling the investigation deeply disturbing if true, and warned against drawing premature conclusions. Not one of them had seen the footage. Not one of them asked to. I kept pushing. We ran voice comparison on the second speaker in tape 23, the one that spoke after Lucas hesitated. A deeper voice, male, unconfirmed. The results were inconclusive. But when we overlaid it with public video of Charles Danner audio from a 1993 town hall meeting, there was enough tonal overlap that our tech flagged it for further analysis. The FBI agreed. Still, without a clean match, it wasn't enough. We needed more. Rio had gone quiet since his second interview, claimed he was tired, refused food. When I went in alone, I didn't press, just sat across from him and waited. Eventually, he started talking. Said Danner kept detailed logs, typed notes, organized by initials, dates, locker numbers. Called it an archive. Said there were rituals, room names, rehearsals. I asked if anyone else was involved. He shook his head at first. Then maybe one. Brought in gear. Lighting stuff. Always wore gloves. I pressed for a name. He swallowed hard like it hurt to say. "Tenko," he whispered. He didn't talk much. Just sat up and left. The name didn't show up in our employee records. But in an old contractor file, YMCA vendor list from the early 90s, we found a match: Matthew Tenko, lighting and AV consultant. Hired for summer programming. Also worked with correctional youth programs and private schools. No address on file. No social listed past 2003. That's when his house burned down. Cause undetermined. Death certificate issued without a body. We reopened it. The property had been vacant since. When we brought in cadaver dogs, they went straight to the back of the lot south fence line. There, buried beneath a collapsed shed, we found a crate. Inside were the charred remains of film reels and bone fragments too small to be adult. Bloodwork from the floor panels pulled one match: Derek Voss, age 6, missing since 1985. His case had been closed as a suspected runaway. Charles Danner was listed as a witness in the original report. Claimed he was present the day Derek left early from swim class. No one had followed up. No one thought to. When we brought the discovery to county prosecutors, they issued a statement requesting additional time before filing. We require physical evidence directly tying Mr. Danner to the recovered remains. The tapes weren't enough. The locker list wasn't enough. The hidden chamber was circumstantial. I stopped reading the statements after that. That week, a motel clerk 2 counties east turned over surveillance footage. A man checked in under the name Ray Carlton. No luggage, just a duffel and a briefcase. Paid cash. No license plate on the car. The timestamp put him 5 hours ahead of the press leak. We were close, but not close enough. Meanwhile, back in Monroe, the pushback continued. Someone left a voicemail on the department tip line. Woman's voice. Older. Said, "You've got the wrong man." He didn't act alone. He just finished what someone else started. We ran the audio. Probable match: Evelyn Parrish. Former YMCA assistant director. Terminated in 1991 after multiple parent complaints about inappropriate supervision during nap time. No charges filed. No follow-up. Relocated to Kansas. Then disappeared. When I brought her name to the bureau, they flagged it immediately. One of their analysts pulled an old training video. Parrish speaking to a room of junior counselors about discipline protocols. The cadence was identical to the voicemail. She was alive and still watching. I returned to the evidence room the next morning to review one of the unmarked tapes found between the labeled ones. It hadn't been cataloged in Riot's inventory. No date, no initials. Just one reel warped slightly from time. When we played it, the footage opened on a boy, older than the others, maybe 10, standing in the center of a room, blank walls, no drawings, no toys, just concrete. He looked into the camera and said, "My name is Jeremy. I don't know where I am." A woman's voice answered, calm and almost gentle, "It's okay, Jeremy," just like we practiced. Then the screen went black. No credits, no tag, nothing. We cross-referenced every missing person named Jeremy between 1985 and 1995. One matched. Jeremy Kalin, age 10. Disappeared July 14th, 1990. Gowson, Indiana. Case ruled a runaway. Never solved. What caught my attention wasn't just the footage. It was the lighting. The shadows in the room flickered unnaturally, like the source was behind a two-way mirror. We enhanced the audio. Faint footsteps above. Then chains. Then the woman's voice again whispering, "Hurry. We only have a few minutes." There was a second child visible in the corner reflection. Watching. Unmoving. I brought the footage to Haskins. Neither of us spoke. Not at first. Then he looked at me and said, "This wasn't a room. It was a network." I nodded, because by then I knew what was coming next. Somewhere out there Jeremy might have survived, and if he did, he was the only one who remembered everything. The week after we found the Jeremy footage, I started noticing things. Subtle things. My badge went missing off my desk, turned up later in the parking lot under my windshield wiper. My mailbox at the department started filling with blank envelopes, no stamps, no postmarks, just white paper sealed and empty. At first I thought it was coincidence, maybe someone messing around in records. But then it started happening at home. A flashlight I kept by the door went missing, then came back the next night placed perfectly in the cradle with the batteries reversed. I didn't say anything right away. I didn't want it to sound like paranoia, but I started locking the inside of my closet, double-checking the rear gate. Small things like counting the steps between my front door and the hallway just to make sure they were still 12. Haskins saw it too. He didn't say much, but I could tell he wasn't sleeping. He was quieter during our case reviews, eyes flicking toward the corner of the room like he was waiting for something to come through the wall. The tape had changed both of us. Because once you realize a kid might still be out there grown up, maybe hidden. Maybe not, your mind doesn't rest. It just circles. We went through the missing persons case file again this time, expanding the radius. I pulled reports from surrounding counties and started cold calling any families who had boys listed between the ages of 5 and 12, gone between 87 and 95. Some numbers were dead. Some were disconnected. A few picked up, and the voices on the other end, some tired, some angry, mostly just said, "Why now?" There was one woman, though. Northern Indiana. Said her son had disappeared in 1990, same month as Jeremy, but they'd been told it was an abduction by a drifter. No suspects, no arrests. She still had the original missing poster taped to the inside of her kitchen cabinet. "I leave it up so I don't forget what I'm looking for," she said. I asked if her son had ever left a note. She paused. "Just a drawing," she said. "A square room with no doors." She faxed it to the department. When I held it against the still image from the tape, the match was exact same dimensions, same window placement, same blank wall across from the camera. He'd drawn it before he vanished. We started cross-referencing YMCA locations that had been renovated in the early 90s. Anything with a closed basement shuttered pool or foundation sealed for safety concerns. There were 7 within a 200-mile radius. 4 had been torn down. 1 was now a storage facility. 2 were still operational but heavily updated. I put in requests for access citing an active investigation. 1 denied outright. The other never responded. At the same time, Riot went silent. He wouldn't eat, wouldn't speak. When the prison nurse tried to take his vitals, he clawed at his own wrists. They moved him to a medical unit and put him on watch. I went in to see him one last time, not expecting much. But as I walked in, he looked up and said, "He found me." I asked who. He said, "The one with the mirror." His eyes were glassy. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. He kept repeating the phrase, "the one with the mirror," until the guards pulled me out. That phrase started showing up in my own mind after that, in quiet moments, at stoplights, when I'd stand in my hallway at night and catch my reflection in the dark glass of the front window. I started writing things down, names, places, dates, anything to keep it from spinning. The more I mapped it, the more it felt like I was circling something I couldn't see. Then one night I pulled out the footage from the very first tape again. Lucas on the mattress. The timestamp, September 2nd, 1994, 7:02 p.m. I noticed something in the corner this time. A reflection in the lens just for a frame. A hand holding something up. Not a camera, a mirror. We enhanced it. Low resolution, but clear enough. The mirror was angled not at Lucas, but at the ceiling. Like someone was watching something above them through the mirror's reflection. There was writing up there. Faint. White chalk. Letters backwards. We reversed the image. 4 words, "Don't look at him." That's when it shifted for me. This wasn't just about confinement or documentation. This was about ritual, about pattern. Something that had been repeated enough times that rules were being written. Warnings left behind. The footage wasn't just a record, it was a manual. I went back to the old tape logs. Riot's inventory listed a gap. 1 week between Jeremy's final tape and the next labeled entry. I pulled the next one. It had never been viewed in full. The audio had always been corrupted. But now we isolated a 10-second burst where something came through low pulsing, like the hum of fluorescent lights, but deeper. Beneath that, a voice. Not a child. Not one of the men. Female older. "He's in the glass," she whispered. "Once you see him, he sees you." That night I turned every mirror in my house to face the wall. It felt childish, maybe superstitious. But something about that voice felt real. Not dramatic, not supernatural, just warned. And warnings don't come from nowhere. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was scared, because I felt close, like I was circling the outer edge of something too large to understand yet, something layered. I sat on my living room floor until morning, going over every file, every note, every photo. And then I saw it, a pattern I'd missed. The boys, every last one, had been listed in their original YMCA records as part of a class, a program, a scheduled rotation. But one stood out. A boy named Andy Barker, 7 years old, not registered, no forms, no check-ins. Just a name scribbled into the staff log by hand Barker brought in for observation. No date. No parent listed. Just one word next to it. Private. That was the name on the envelope we found in Locker 13. Mr. Private. Do not destroy. Andy's name had never shown up in any official system. No missing persons file, no school withdrawal. It was like he'd been a ghost, a placeholder. I pulled the personnel logs again. The day his name appeared, only 3 staff had signed in Rio Danner, and a woman listed as a guest consultant. Initials only. EP. I already knew what that meant. Evelyn Parrish. Still unaccounted for. Still missing. I leaned back in my chair, listening to the low hum of the lights overhead. and I wrote one word at the top of my notes, circled it twice. Recruitment. Because somewhere in those tapes, someone wasn't just recording. They were choosing, watching, preparing, and I was starting to wonder if Jeremy had been the last child they ever lost, or the first one they ever let go. It was around 2 a.m. when I found the post-it note. I'd come back to the station to grab my backup recorder and noticed something off with my locker. Just a slight resistance when I pulled the handle. Inside, everything looked untouched, but taped to the inside of the door was a yellow square of paper. No handwriting, just a small circle drawn in red ink. I took it off, sat at my desk, and stared at it for a long time. It matched the shape from a doodle found on one of the locker forms from 1991. Same pen pressure, same uneven edge. I don't know what made me think to flip it over, but when I did, there was a line typed in faint, almost fading ribbon. Ask about 311 W. Dusenberry, under the stairs. That address hadn't come up in any of the files. It wasn't tied to the YMCA or to Danner or to Riot, but it was close, only 6 blocks from the original Monroe facility, a 1-story ranch-style house with green siding and a broken porch swing. We checked the property registry the next morning. It had changed hands 5 times between 1990 and 2000, then sat vacant until 2013 when a shell company picked it up for cash. On paper, it was listed as a rental, but the last 3 tenants couldn't be located. When we pulled the electrical logs, they showed an unusual spike every Thursday between 9 p.m. and midnight, same 4-hour window going back years. The meter readings were consistent with high-draw equipment, industrial lighting, audio rigs, recording gear. We got the warrant within 48 hours. The front door had 3 separate locks, all reinforced. Inside the house was mostly empty, just a stained couch, a folding chair, and a wall covered in corkboard. The pins were still there, but whatever had been attached was gone. In the kitchen, there was an unplugged mini-fridge. Inside were 4 cassette tapes tightly packed in foam, each one labeled with the same date, Oct. 12, 1991. We found the staircase behind a false wall in the hallway. It had been sealed from the outside, but inside the wood was worn smooth like it had been opened and shut thousands of times. There were boot marks on the floor. Beneath the stairs, we found the hatch. No lock, just an old brass handle rusted to the base. When we opened it, the smell came first. Not rot, not decay. Bleach. Layers of it. The crawl space was dry, lined with soundproof foam, and measured exactly 6 feet by 8. A mounted camera was bolted to one corner, wires snaking back into the wall. There was no tape inside, but we recovered a small strip of Polaroids taped to the underside of the hatch. 10 photographs, grainy and bent. All children, some looking directly at the camera, others staring off frame. And in one of them, 5th from the left, was Lucas. Same red trunks, same towel. But behind him, just barely visible in the corner, was a shadow. A partial figure, hand on his shoulder. I took that photo to Dana. She looked at it and nodded, then turned away. Said it was the last towel she ever saw in their house, the one he took to swim lessons. Said Chuck had given it to him. When we analyzed the tapes from the mini-fridge, they were degraded, some almost unsalvageable. But tape 3 had a sequence we could pull audio from. At the 37-minute mark, there's a sound. Not a voice breathing. Shallow. Childlike. Followed by a whisper. "Don't let him hear you cry." The same voice repeated that line 3 times, then silence. Then a door closing. That was the first time we heard the third voice again, the woman's. Calm. Rehearsed. "If you remember this, say nothing." The phrase was buried under static, but it matched the tone of the previous tapes. Same rhythm, same hush, like it was being recited from memory. The forensic team found hair strands in the foam under the crawl space. 3 separate DNA profiles. One matched Lucas, another matched Derek. The third came back as inconclusive but female, likely adolescent. We checked the missing persons lists again. Found a girl named Allison K. Peterson, 8 years old, disappeared 1993. Last seen leaving a youth reading program hosted at the Monroe YMCA. That event had been organized by Evelyn Parrish. When I brought her name up to the bureau liaison, he looked at me and said, "We've heard it before, but no trace, nothing digital, not even a license renewal." I started wondering if she'd been using an alias, something that could mask travel reroute funding. The financial analyst on our task force pulled years of shell company movements, nonprofits, education grants, church subsidies. One name kept circling back: Monroe Youth Enrichment Foundation, founded in 1989, shut down in 1995, then reopened in 2002 under a new EIN and mailing address in Michigan. The signatory C. Danner. We requested the account logs. Buried in the oldest entries were checks paid to a vendor listed as A. Barker, freelance education consultant. That name hadn't shown up before. It wasn't in the missing persons registry, but it was familiar. Andy Barker. The boy scribbled into the staff log, the one with no file, no parent listed. Someone had been using his name to move funds. We tracked the mailing address, a converted farmhouse outside Port Huron, windows blacked out, mailbox chained shut. A camera mounted above the door with a red light blinking every 6 seconds. When local officers went to do a check, they found the place stripped. No furniture. No records, just a fold-out mattress and a small stack of composition books hidden under the floorboards. The books were empty except one. The last 6 pages were written in pencil, shaky, uneven, a mix of letters and symbols. But on the final page, there was a message. Block letters. "The room isn't gone. It moves." That line stayed with me. I thought about the lockers, the hatch, the crawl space, how every site had been cleared, cleaned, hidden again. I thought about the photo of Lucas, that faint figure behind him, half in the light, half in the wall. And I thought about the last tape Riot ever recorded before his transfer, audio only. Just him, breathing, whispering. We weren't supposed to film the last one. He made us anyway. He said it was for training. There was a pause. Then, he wanted them to learn, so they'd know how to choose. That word again, choose. Not take, not harm. Choose. And in that moment, something shifted. Because maybe this hadn't been about one man at all. Maybe Chuck wasn't the architect. Maybe he was the recruiter. And the one giving orders, the one no one ever named, was still out there. Not gone, just somewhere else. Waiting. Watching. The farmhouse in Port Huron wasn't the end of the trail, it was the beginning of a deeper one. The kind of place that didn't lead to an answer, just a hallway of doors with no handles. I kept circling that phrase from the notebook, "The room isn't gone. It moves." I brought it up to Haskins, but he was already thinking the same thing. We started pulling utility records for Monroe and the surrounding counties, not addresses, just power patterns. High output surges in off hours. Equipment left running in buildings that were listed as vacant. There were 3 that stood out. One was a shuttered skating rink in Cass County. Another was an old church gymnasium that had been partially converted into storage. The third was a former rec center just west of Dorr, Michigan. That's the one we focused on. It had been owned by the county until 1999, then sold in pieces to a developer who never finished the renovations. Local reports said kids had been breaking in for years, but the interior had been gutted. No plumbing, no lighting, just concrete and beams. But the meter was still live. Quiet, steady draw like a fan left running underground. We took a marked car out there just after noon. No backup, no warrant yet. Just the 2 of us and a pair of flashlights. The main building was padlocked, but the back entrance had been forced open at some point. There was a trail of dirt that didn't match the rest of the dust pattern, fresh, scattered in wide arcs, like something had been dragged and then swept. The deeper we went, the colder it got. Not freezing, just still. No airflow. Just that kind of thick quiet that presses in around your ears. We reached the basement access stairwell, but the steps were stripped. Just a metal frame leading down into a black pit. We used our belts to anchor a line, lowered ourselves one at a time. The air down there tasted like rust and oil, and then the smell hit bleach again. Beneath that mildew. Something older. The flashlight caught a glint ahead, metal plates lining a section of wall. We followed them to what looked like an access door. It wasn't locked, just heavy. Inside was a corridor lined with foam. Same dimensions as the space under 311 Dusenberry. Only this time there were 3 rooms side by side with small glass portholes in each door. Room 1 was empty. Just a cot and a plastic bin filled with worn sneakers. Room 2 had a small desk, piles of tape reels labeled with numbers instead of names. No recording equipment, just tags. Cross-referenced symbols that matched the composition books. Room 3 had blood, not a pool, not a body, just fine droplets sprayed across the back wall. Someone had tried to clean it. The smears were wide, uneven. But in the corner, untouched, was a line written in chalk. You don't have to look. He already knows. I radioed it in, but Haskins kept walking. He found another door at the far end of the hallway, smaller with no handle, just a keypad and a speaker port. I said we needed to wait for backup. He didn't answer, just stood there staring at the panel, and then a voice crackled through so faint we almost missed it. Is someone there? It was a child's voice. Couldn't have been older than 10. Haskins stepped forward, tried to speak, but the speaker cut off. Just a static hum, then silence. We marked the panel, took photos, then pulled back. The department wanted full jurisdiction, but something in me didn't want to wait. That night I stayed in the file room. Something was off with the timeline. If Danner had been running funding through Barker's name, why had Riot said we weren't supposed to film the last one? Who was we? I pulled the oldest staff logs again. Monroe, YMCA, 1990 through 1995. One name came up twice, then vanished. Assistant Director of Programming. Initials EP. I traced the ID number to a defunct payroll system. But the emergency contact listed wasn't Evelyn Parrish. It was a man named Grant Holloway. No record of employment. No ties to the department. But listed as authorized custodian for child programming access. That title doesn't exist in any YMCA manual I've ever seen. I ran the name through background systems. Nothing came up, not even a birth certificate. But there was one hit. A police report filed in 1996. Property disturbance. Caller had reported a man on their property trying to retrieve an archived copy of access codes from the door facility. The witness said the man claimed he was retrieving authorized materials from a former youth compliance division. That phrase struck me. Youth compliance. It's not law enforcement. It's not education. It's something invented. Something you'd only use if you didn't want anyone to look further. I called the property owner who filed the complaint. They'd moved to Florida, but the woman remembered the man clearly. Tall, gray suit, no ID badge. She said he kept using the word reclamation. Said he was looking for the list. When I asked what list, she said he never explained, just kept asking if anyone else had access to the basement. That word again. Basement. Room. Hatch. All connected. All different. All. I called Haskins after midnight. Told him I was driving back to the door site. I wasn't waiting for jurisdiction. He didn't try to talk me out of it. Just said, take a second light. I arrived around 2:15 a.m. The air was colder than before. Same bleach trace in the hallway. Same hum behind the walls. I made it back to the keypad door. It was still sealed. But this time the speaker lit up without a prompt. No voice. Just a slow, rhythmic knock. 1. Pause. 1. Pause. Then 4 in a row. I froze. The knock pattern. I'd seen it before. It was in the margins of one of the notebooks, scribbled over and over like a chant. I leaned forward and whispered, "Andy?" No response, but the light blinked off, then came back on. And this time the speaker said one word. Soft, measured, closer. I stepped back, left the room. I didn't try to open it, because whatever was behind that door wasn't asking to be rescued. It was waiting. And I was beginning to understand that maybe these kids hadn't just been taken. Maybe some had been made to stay, not forced, but prepared, recruited, groomed to continue something, to be the next speaker behind the wall. And if that's true, then the one who trained them, the one who chose them, is still out there, not hiding, just waiting for someone to come close enough to let him in. I went back to the station and locked the door behind me. Didn't turn the lights on. Just sat at my desk staring at the photo again, Lucas in the towel, that hand on his shoulder. The outline behind him wasn't clear, not fully, but when I adjusted the brightness on the scanned image, I could make out more of the figure. A collar, a dark sleeve, what looked like a badge clipped to the chest. It wasn't Chuck. Chuck didn't wear uniforms. This was someone else. Someone from inside. I sent the image to Haskins without comment. He called 20 minutes later and just said, "I think we missed it." We met in person 2 hours later, just after dawn. He brought copies of the original staff lists, not the ones we'd been using, but scanned straight from the original ledgers. The name that had been blacked out before, it was there now. Grant Holloway. Listed not as staff, but as independent auditor, attached to a Michigan state agency that on paper didn't exist. It was a dummy title, the kind you use to get clearance without background checks, but someone had given him full access to youth programming across 3 counties. His name popped up again next to a conference held in Lansing in '92. Topic: Prevention through Preparedness. The subtitle was more chilling: Early Identification Models for Behavioral Risk. I requested the guest list. It was incomplete, but the host organization was real. A former nonprofit run by a woman named Evelyn Parrish. That same name kept coming up, over and over. Dana pulled an archived grant ledger from the county library, and there it was. Parrish listed as Director of Youth Wellness Solutions from 1987 to 1994. After that, no trace. But the building listed as her office still stood. It was an old red brick clinic on the edge of Monroe, boarded up now, roof sagging in the back. We got a warrant to enter, but it wasn't sealed, just padlocked with a rusted chain. Inside the place was a time capsule. Desks, papers, a few broken chairs. On the far wall, beneath a corkboard, we found a filing cabinet still bolted to the floor. The top 2 drawers were empty. The third was jammed. Haskins pried it open with a screwdriver. Inside were dozens of manila envelopes, each labeled with a child's name and a number. The names were familiar. Kids from the YMCA, kids from the early case files. Lucas was one of them. So was Derek. And Andy Barker. Each envelope held school records intake assessments, photos, some taken outside their homes, candid, distant. These weren't medical files. They were surveillance packets. Someone had been building psychological profiles, tracking children. And beside each name was a handwritten score. Most had 3s or 4s. A few had 5s. But only one had a 7, Allison Peterson. The missing girl from 1993. Her file had a red tag inside, labeled Extended Observation. The photos of her were different, smiling in some, blank in others, and one in particular, her sitting in a small room, foam walls looking directly at the lens, matched the background from the crawlspace photo. We had confirmation now. Whoever had run that clinic had used it as a staging point, a place to watch and rate children, to decide who moved forward. Haskins took the files to be logged. I stayed behind, staring at the last photo of Allison. Something in the corner caught my eye. a reflection in the glass of the photo frame a shape, curved, like a sigil. I flipped it over, and on the back someone had etched a symbol into the cardboard. It looked like two overlapping circles with a line through the center. I remembered it from the composition books. It wasn't decorative. It was a marker, like a tag. We searched the rest of the clinic and found more symbols scratched behind the toilet tank, burned into the underside of a desk drawer. It wasn't random. These were designations, codes for location or clearance. I pulled in a linguist from the university. He said it resembled a cipher, something used in private networks or old intelligence communities to mark safe houses or drop points. That word chilled me. Safe houses. These weren't places where kids were protected. They were places where they were stored, tracked, categorized, chosen. When I showed the symbol to Dana, she froze. Said she'd seen it once on a bracelet Lucas had brought home from day camp. She thought it was a toy, just plastic. But now she remembered it had been taken from him by Chuck the same day. She never saw it again. That wasn't the end of it. The following night, someone broke into the evidence lockup. Only one item was taken, the set of cassette tapes from 311 Dusenberry. No sign of forced entry. The guard on duty didn't even hear the door open. The security footage was wiped, just static from 1:03 to 1:09 a.m. But when we reviewed the physical logs, one name had signed in, a name that wasn't supposed to be there. Alan Riot, transferred in 1997, deceased 1998. Or so we thought. There was never a body, just a death certificate filed by a private hospital upstate. I called them. The admin had no record of him. No billing, no discharge paperwork. It was a ghost entry, a planted file, which meant someone had used his name to take those tapes, and whoever it was, they knew the system better than we did. Haskins ordered internal review. I requested federal assistance, but deep down I knew what was happening. We weren't chasing a man. We were circling a pattern, a design that kept adjusting, shifting. Every time we got close to naming it, it changed shape. But the core stayed the same. Kids marked, sorted, moved. Voices trained to whisper from behind the wall, and someone, maybe many someones, making sure those voices never stopped. I went home that night, sat in the dark, and played the audio from tape 3 again. Just static, then the whisper. If you remember this, say nothing. And in that moment I realized that wasn't a warning. It was a command. Taught, practiced, passed down. And if it was still echoing, then whoever started it had never stopped. We didn't wait. By sunrise, Haskins had signed off on a sweep of the old pool site. Not just the sub-level everything. The foundation, the storage rooms, even the storm drains. We called in a forensic ground team from Indianapolis. Quiet, unmarked transport. No press, no sirens, no chatter over public channels. I stood on the north edge of the lot where the old chain-link gate used to be, watching them bring up drills and wet vacs and grid markers. From that distance, the building didn't look like a crime scene. It looked like any other condemned structure. Just worn brick and shuttered windows. But every inch of it had been used and repurposed and covered again. A containment system with layers we were still peeling back. On day 2, the dogs hit on something buried near the utility corridor concrete slab under the old chlorine tanks. They brought in a jackhammer. The slab had been poured over rebar and sheet steel, which was unusual for that part of the floor. They cut through it section by section until we saw what was underneath. A chamber. Not large, maybe 12 by 8 feet. Dry, clean, insulated, lined with tile. 2 small vents punched into opposite corners. No door, no ladder. The only way in or out was from above. We lowered a light and camera down first, then a small retrieval unit. Inside were toys, a radio, a cot, a softcover book with its pages ripped in half. And in the corner, tucked into a plastic file box, were 17 lanyards, each one red, each one tagged with a name. Lucas's was there. Derek's. 3 belonged to kids from the 88 disappearances that were never officially linked. One was Allison Peterson's, and one had no name, just a blank card. That box wasn't evidence. It was record-keeping, inventory. Each lanyard folded the same way, labeled, cleaned, preserved, like someone had been planning to come back. That night, we brought the information to the families, quietly. We didn't hold a press conference, didn't assign a media liaison. We met them in the community hall behind St. Joseph's. No uniforms, no tape recorders, just the truth as plainly as we could say it. Some asked if their children had died there. We told them we didn't know, not for certain. Some of the names didn't have matching remains. Some had never been declared dead at all. There was no single ending, no fixed timeline. But the space that room meant they had been taken somewhere, held somewhere by people who planned it. That was the part that hit hardest. The planning. This wasn't impulse. It wasn't opportunity. It was engineered. The state opened a formal investigation within 72 hours. But even then, the records were patchy. The symbols we found in the clinic led to 3 other buildings, 2 in Indiana, 1 across the border in Michigan. All had been vacated. One was gone, entirely replaced by a strip mall. But the floor plans showed a matching footprint. Same dimensions, same internal shapes. A forensic analyst noted that the vents were built not for airflow, but for audio. Sound could travel out, or in. We recovered a rusted speaker coil from the wall cavity dated 1989. It still had a clipped wire attached labeled Channel C. I asked what Channel C meant. The tech didn't know, but he said it was probably internal routing, a way to separate rooms during transmission, which meant there were other channels, other rooms. We brought Dana back in. She'd requested to see the site herself. She didn't cry, didn't flinch, just walked to the edge, looked down into the opening and said, "He told me the floor would never let him fall." I asked her what she meant. She said Lucas used to have a fear of heights, that he'd always ask if things were hollow underneath. Stairs, bleachers, bridges. She said the only place he never asked was the pool. He trusted it, said it was solid, said it would never let him fall. But it did. The case file ballooned overnight. State crime units, missing persons task forces, and even a small cold case subunit from Ohio came forward with matches. But most of what we found wasn't conclusive. The patterns were there, symbols, lanyards, assessments, but the people were gone. Paper trails dissolved. Contracts signed under initials. Grant funding buried under shell nonprofits. And Holloway, if that was ever his real name, was untraceable. No tax ID, no surviving next of kin, no DNA on file. Just his face in one photo leaning over a child he was never supposed to touch. That's what stayed with me. Not the room, not the box, the posture, the familiarity in it. Like he belonged there, like someone had let him in. The city finally gave us clearance to decommission the site. They poured the chamber shut with reinforced grout, placed a memorial plaque above the slab. 7 names, 5 pending, 2 unknown. But I kept one item from the site. Not for evidence, for clarity. It was Lucas's lanyard, his name still visible. Faded, but not gone. The plastic was cracked from age, but the metal clasp still worked. I held it in my palm the night the building came down, watched as the excavators tore through the brick, and just before the back wall collapsed, I saw a marking spray-painted behind a beam. Faint, orange, 2 circles, line through the center. But this one had a second line, like a tally. I took a picture, sent it to Haskins. He called me back 2 minutes later and said, "That means there's another." I asked where. He said he didn't know, not yet. But the count had changed, and someone had already marked the next one. I still have the picture. It's buried in a folder on a drive I never use anymore, backed up 3 different ways but never shown to anyone outside the case. 2 circles, a line through the center, then a second line newer, sharper. That marking is why I haven't closed the file. Even after the city sealed the foundation. Even after the last report was signed and filed. I still think about what it meant, and why it was left there just visible enough to be found if someone knew where to look. They never reopened the case publicly, not after the initial wave of forensic teams and interdepartmental memos. But quietly in the months that followed, certain files were re-examined. Travel logs, public grant records, architectural permits, nothing that pointed to one person. But there was a pattern, a kind of traveling signature. In small towns, mostly places where schools closed early or programs were quietly absorbed into pilot partnerships. Always under different names, always with temporary staff. Holloway might have been the architect, but he wasn't alone. And whatever he built, it didn't end in that room. Dana stayed with us another 2 weeks. Then she moved in with her aunt upstate. I saw her one last time the day she left. She handed me a folded note, said she found it tucked inside her old suitcase. It wasn't signed and it wasn't dated. Just 4 words printed in block letters. You kept him safe, that was all. But it told me something I hadn't let myself believe until then. That Lucas might have been alive at least for a while after he vanished, that someone tried to shield him, and that someone else remembered. The lab never found prints. No matching handwriting. But I keep the note in the same folder as the photo. I look at them together like they're halves of the same truth. As for me, I stayed on, transferred to a smaller district eventually. Less pressure, less noise. I still work cold cases, but I don't chase theories anymore. I follow people, how they move, where they circle back, what they leave behind that doesn't quite fit. Sometimes that's where the truth lives. Not in what we find, but in who still remembers. The families never fully moved on. Some held memorials, some moved out of state, some kept waiting. One father, Mr. Delaney, sent me a Christmas card every year for 5 years straight, always with the same message. Thank you for trying. I never knew what to write back. Still don't. But I kept them all. There's a weight to knowing a story doesn't end, not really. Just changes shape. Fades in some places, sharpens in others. You learn to carry it differently. Not to put it down, not to forget it, but to hold it more quietly, more carefully. I walk past the old pool site sometimes. It's just a flat stretch of concrete now with a new fence and some benches. Nothing remarkable, but if the light's low enough and you stand in the right spot, you can still see the edges, where the ground was dug, where the bricks were pulled away, where the truth tried to stay hidden. If this story stayed with you, consider sharing it. So no name, no mark, and no quiet voice is ever buried for good.